Chapter 4, Part 2 of Caleb's story. Jericho was still smoldering when Joshua sent spies to Ai near Beth-haven. It lay to the east of Bethel, where Israel's ancestor Jacob had seen the ladder into heaven and the angels going up and down. The spies returned within a short time. It's not like Jericho. Not all of our people will have to go up against it. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it. There's no need to tire the people over the few in Ai. Joshua considered and then nodded. Go and do so. As soon as the messengers left, Caleb leaned over the maps made from their first sojourn into Canaan 40 years earlier. Joshua laid out God's plan to conquer Canaan. The men are returning from Ai, the breathless messenger looked ashen, and they're bringing wounded and bodies. Caleb ran out to find his sons. Shobab was wounded. Misha wept. We thought it would be so easy after Jericho, but the men of Ai routed us. They chased us from the city gate as far as the stone quarries. The arrow hit Shobab while he retreated to the slopes. We ran, he sobbed. Arden didn't make it, Father. He's dead. My son? My son, Caleb wept. How could this happen now? Joshua cried out at the news and tore his clothes. He went straight to the tabernacle and fell face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord. Caleb stood outside waiting, trembling. What had gone wrong? The people began gathering, 12, 100, 1,000. Those who had lost sons and husbands wailed and threw dust over themselves. Joshua came outside within moments, his face ashen. We have violated the Lord's covenant. Caleb felt cold. When? How? Who? Fear gripped him. What would God do to them? What plague would come upon Israel? What retribution for unfaithfulness? Someone has stolen things devoted to the Lord and then lied and put these things among their own possessions. Until this is settled, we can't stand against our enemies. Joshua's voice kept rising. Consecrate yourselves, he shouted to the people. Present yourselves before the Lord tomorrow, tribe by tribe, clan by clan, family by family. The one who is caught with devoted things will be burned along with everything that belongs to him. Caleb gestured for his sons and grandsons, their wives and concubines to return to their camp. He studied each one of his sons and grandsons. He looked at his concubines. He hated the feeling of distrust welling within him, the wrath and frustration, the fear of knowing someone who belonged to him may have brought God's wrath upon an entire nation. But who would dare steal from God? God will tell us who the guilty man is, and whoever he is, he will die. Don't let it be one of my sons or grandsons. No one said a word, but Caleb saw that his own feelings were reflected in their eyes. They looked at one another, questioning, wondering, afraid. Until the guilty party was found, everyone would be suspect. No one slept that night. Not one of my sons, not one of my grandsons, Lord. Let it not be anyone from Judah. In the morning, Eleazar the priest stood with Joshua as the tribes came forward one by one. The Reubenites passed by, then the Simeonites. Judah was halted. Caleb wanted to sink to the ground in shame. As the other tribes moved back from them, Judah came forward clan by clan. Caleb went first, followed by his sons, grandsons, and all their wives, concubines, and children. They were not stopped, but Caleb felt no great relief. Judah, oh Judah, leader among your brothers, are you leaders in sin as well? The Shelonite clan passed by, then the Perizzites. When the Zaharite clan came before Eleazar and Joshua, they were halted. Joshua commanded them to come forward family by family. Caleb watched Eleazar and knew the moment God revealed the guilty man. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zimri. Caleb hung his head and wept. Achan and Arden had played together. They had trained together, laughed together, gone out into battle together. It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel, Achan spoke quickly, prancing and sweating in fear before Joshua and Eleazar, turning to his Judean brothers. I saw a beautiful robe imported from Babylon, 200 silver coins, and a bar of gold weighing more than a pound. I wanted them so much that I took them. They are hidden in the ground beneath my tent, with the silver buried deeper than the rest. Go, Joshua gestured to assistants, and they departed. Everyone waited until they returned with the beautiful multicolored woven embroidered robe, the silver and the gold. The silver and gold were given to Eleazar and the priest to spread out before the Lord. Joshua turned to Caleb, his eyes filled with sorrow. We must take Achan and all that belongs to him to the valley. As head of Judah, Caleb obeyed the command. Achan did not go easily. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it. I don't know what got into me. It's just a robe and some silver and some gold. Is that reason enough to kill me and my entire family? Caleb, help me. My grandfather and father were your friends. The council will listen to you. Help me. Grief and disappointment fueled Caleb's rage as he backhanded Achan, who fell to his knees begging. Pity caught at Caleb, but he dragged him up. His son Arden had died because of this man's sin. So had 35 others. Caleb thought of their widows and children as he propelled Achan ahead of him. He would not listen to Achan's excuses or his pleas for mercy. He closed his ears to the sobs of Achan's sons and daughters as others pressed them along after their father. Even the man's cattle, donkeys, and sheep were driven into the valley, and his tent and all that he had were cast down around him. Spare my children, Achan screamed, weeping, at least my sons, so that my name will. Why have you brought trouble on us? Joshua's voice carried so that all those standing around the rim of the small valley heard. The Lord will now bring trouble on you. He took up a rock. Caleb did likewise, gripping it tightly, palms sweating, tears filling his eyes. Achan's screams were abruptly silenced, as were those of his sons and daughters. The animals were not so easily killed. When everything that breathed was dead, the remains and all Achan's possessions were torched. Then stones were piled up in a heap. Silent, the people dispersed. Caleb returned to his tent with his sons and grandsons. Some wept, others were quiet. Some questioned. Caleb stood firm. Achan had to die. Yes, but did his children, one of the women wept? Caleb felt every day of his 80 years. They knew. Don't you understand? They all knew. Achan buried inside of his tent what he stole from God. Do you think his sons and daughters didn't know about it? He swept his arm wide. Could I dig a hole here and my family not see it? No. Achan's sons and daughters saw what he did and said nothing. They forsook the word of the Lord and followed their father. They were all guilty. He loved Arden like a brother, Sobab shook his head. They were friends from childhood. You heard what he said. He wasn't thinking clearly when he took those things. It all happened in the heat of battle. He didn't mean to sin. Do not pity him. Tears streamed down Caleb's face. Achan knew he sinned. It took time to smuggle those things out of Jericho. It took time to hide them. He thought he could steal from God and no one would know. And Arden died in Ai because of him. To show him pity is to rebel against the Lord's judgment. Think of Arden and the 35 others who died because of one man's greed. We grieve and suffer now because of Achan. He had herds of cattle and flocks of sheep. His sons rode on donkeys like young princes. God had given him wealth. Was he satisfied? No. Was he thankful? No. He spit in disgust. Your brother and the others died because Achan wanted a robe, and the others died because Achan wanted a robe and a few silver shekels and a wedge of gold. For 40 years, he had taught and counseled his sons and grandsons. Did they still not understand? You must obey the Lord. Whatever he says, you must do. God gave us the law to protect us, to teach us how to live righteously before him. The battle belongs to the Lord. We are to be holy as he is holy. How can we do that, Father? Hur, the only son of his beloved Ephraim, leaned forward. You know we love you and respect you. He held his hands out. We all strive to do whatever you ask of us because we know you live for God. But I want to know, Father, how is it possible to be holy like God? How can we keep every law laid on our backs? I try. God must know I try, but I fail. Caleb saw the anguish in his son's eyes. He saw the others were troubled as well. Yes, he let out his breath slowly. Yes, we all fail. He banged his chest with his fists, but inside, we fight to do what the Lord wills. We must fight our inclinations. They listened more intently now than they had for a long time. The battle is not over what's out there. The battle is within us, always within us. Achan had been judged rightly, and now they must forget their sorrow and their losses and move forward with God. If you can only remember one command, my sons, let it be this: love the Lord with all of your heart, mind, and soul and strength. And if you can do that, God will show you that all things are possible with him. Caleb spread his hands. Say it with me, and they did. Say it again, and they did, louder, and again, and they shouted it. Say it every day for the rest of your lives, and live by your word. Bowing his head, Caleb prayed a blessing upon them. Hide in ambush close behind the city and be ready for action, Joshua pointed to the map. Caleb studied the markings so he would know where he would hold the men. Joshua straightened. When our main army attacks, the men of Ai will come out to fight as they did before, and we will run away from them. We will let them chase us until they have all left the city, for they will say, the Israelites are running away from us as they did before. Then you will jump up from your ambush and take possession of the city, for the Lord your God will give it to you. And when we have the city in our hands, set the city on fire as the Lord has commanded. You have your orders. Caleb led the men by night to their position behind the city. They waited until early the next morning when the messenger reported that Joshua had mustered his men and was on the move. From his position, Caleb could see Joshua's army approaching the city and form in front of it, setting up a camp north of Ai, with a valley between them and the city. With Caleb's 5,000 men to the west of the city, the men of Ai would be boxed into the valley with no escape. Shouting arose as warriors poured from the gates of Ai, chasing Joshua and his army toward the desert. Caleb snapped his fingers and several messengers ducked down beside him. The men of Ai are in pursuit of Joshua. Alert the men. The men of Ai raced across the valley, leaving the gates of the city open and unguarded. Spotting Joshua, Caleb waited, teeth gritted, for the sign. And then it came. Joshua pointed his javelin toward Ai. Now, Caleb shouted and rose up. Those under his command followed him up the slope and in through the city gates. People screamed and ran, but they didn't get far. Torch the city, hurry! Fires were set and buildings took flame. Smoke billowing into the sky. To the battle! Caleb mustered his men. The warriors of Ai were in full retreat into the valley, but they couldn't escape, for 5,000 Israelites blocked them. For the Lord! Sword raised, Caleb ran toward the warriors of Ai. For the Lord! Thousands responded. The valley became like a bowl of blood. Every warrior of Ai died there. Joshua took the king of Ai and hung him on a tree until evening, then ordered his body taken down and thrown on the burning city gate. They built 2 altars of uncut stones, one on Mount Ebal and one on Mount Gerizim. Gather the people. When all the men, women, children, and aliens living among them were brought near, Joshua read the law God had given Moses to write. Not a word was left out. The blessings and the curses were heard clearly from the one mountain to the other. No one would ever be able to say they had not heard the Lord's warnings of what would happen if men failed to obey him. Who are you? Caleb narrowed his eyes as he studied a ragged delegation of men, their donkeys loaded with worn-out sacks and cracked and mended wineskins. Where did you come from? A long distance from their appearance, for their sandals were patched. We are your servants. We have come to make a treaty with you. Some of the younger men had gathered around to watch. They might live near us. How can we make a treaty with them? Eleazar raised his hands. Let them speak. Joshua looked them over. Who are you, and where do you come from? We are your servants. We have come from a distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. We heard reports about him and all that he did in Egypt, and what he did to those 2 kings of the Amorites east of Jordan, Sihon and Og. Our elders told us to take provisions and come to meet with you. The speaker reached into his pack. Caleb drew his sword. A dozen others did the same. The man's eyes went wide. I only want to show you what has become of our provisions. Back away. Caleb stepped forward and looked in the pack. That bread was warm and fresh when we left home. The man put his hand on the wineskins, and these new and filled. Caleb tore off a piece of bread. After a taste, he spit it out, dry, moldy, but he still didn't trust them. We'll make a treaty with you. Joshua and most of the elders were in agreement. Caleb was not so easily convinced. The Lord said, make no treaties. Yes, Joshua grew impatient, but we must not be too quick to judge and wipe out people. The Lord meant no treaties with those of the land. These men are from a distant country. We have no reason to be at war with them. Then why do I feel this unease in my gut? Joshua slapped him on the back. Perhaps it is because of the bread you just ate. Others laughed, friends of old. Overruled Caleb, kept silent. The delegation left soon after the treaty was made. 3 days later, Israelite warriors sent to scout out the land returned red-faced and raging. They're Hivites from Gibeon. The clothes they wore was a ruse. We did not attack because we signed a treaty with them. Caleb exploded in anger. They made fools of us. Of me. Joshua was pale with mortification. I did not inquire of the Lord. I did what I thought was right. Well, you'd better pray now, my brother, because we are all in trouble. The people are not happy about what we've done. The people grumbled. God said not to make a treaty with these people. What were you thinking? They'll be a thorn in our sides from now on. The leaders argued among themselves over what to do. They lied. We don't owe them anything. The tribe of Simeon was eager for blood. I say we march on their city and kill every last one of them. Those representing the other tribes were as eager for revenge. That's what the Lord told us to do in the first place. Joshua shook his head. We must keep our oath. Caleb listened to all the others talk at once. They were afraid, and with good reason. The people were angry and casting blame. Be still, he spoke loudly, and the others quieted. We made a mistake in not asking God who these men were. We must not make another. My heart cries out for vengeance just as yours does, but vengeance belongs to the Lord. Listen to Joshua. And they waited for God's chosen to speak. We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now. If we break our oath, we will bring God's wrath down upon us. So what do we do about them? Joshua called the people to order and told them the way of the Lord. Then he summoned the Gibeonites. Why did you lie to us? We did it because we were told that the Lord your God instructed his servant Moses to conquer this entire land and destroy all the people living in it. So we feared for our lives because of you. That is why we've done it. Now we're at your mercy. Do whatever you think is right. Whatever you think is right, Caleb seethed. These people knew the oath couldn't be broken without incurring God's wrath. The Gibeonites had counted on it. The people grumbled. A wave of fury could be felt until Joshua reminded them that the Lord would hold the nation to their oath. He faced the frightened Gibeonites. You are under a curse. From this day forth, you will never cease to serve as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of God, my God. They bowed before him and departed. The camp was quiet that night. God's enemies would now retain a toehold in the land for generations to come.